Welcome back to the Racer X track examination. This time we are talking the Ricky Carmichael designed Daytona track map for the 2023 season. Joining me today is the 1990 125 East Supercross champion, as well as the voice of the sport for many years and after the turn of the century, the founder of Moto Extreme 360 Fantasy, Denny Stephenson. Debo, thanks for joining me today to break this one down.
Well, Donnie, thank you for having me. As we talked about off camera, very stoked on the way you've created a niche in the sports. You're doing a great job, and your attention to detail and the videos and everything. You really opened an eye up to the viewers. I think that's what's important. So happy to be here.
Appreciate it. So let's start off with the easy question. Denny, what is the first thing that jumps out to you about this year's track layout?
Well, before even talking about this year, it's obviously a facility that's probably iconic in the sport. It's next to A1, which hasn't always been A1. Daytona has been around probably as long as any facility yet. It's actually a track that I won on that didn't get uploaded, so that's kind of appreciative on my point. But it went from a very wide facility. They widened pit road, which narrowed the track for Ricky. They implemented the sprinkler system, which has kind of been a challenge for Ricky as well, I know. It's much more clay based than it's been in the past and over the years and implemented. It went from daytime to nighttime, obviously. First thing we look at, and I think a lot of people know, it's very similar to what we saw last year as far as the layout goes. And I don't think that is a cause for concern. Obviously, Ricky, I think, has found a good niche of where the track will lay out perfectly, fit along the needs that Daytona Motorsports needs to happen. And sometimes when a track makes a good race, why mess with it,
That's fair. That's fair. In your heyday of racing, the series was actually intermingled with Supercross and outdoor dates, alternating through part of the series. And Daytona kind of worked as a bridge round, merging the two series together. Famously, they had the more gates, kind of a different format from typical Supercross. As a fan and as a racer, do you wish we still did that sort of thing? Or do you kind of like it that we've completely separated the two?
I appreciated the fact that Daytona was Daytona, that they didn't try to make it Supercross as much. Obviously Gary Bailey, I think, did the tracks in the 90s and 80s. That people think whoops for Nolly today, and not to go back to be a guy that yells at kids, get off my lawn, but they were made out of telephone whoops in the 80s. Imagine telephone poles covered in sand being your whoop section. And then that obviously changed more, and it was more about how the track broke down than really the obstacles themselves. I would say back in the 90s, they went from a 40 rider gate to a 30 rider gate in the 90s, which again was just crazy to have that many guys on the track. So imagine, similar to the 450s today, how quickly the bikes can break the track down. You put 30 guys out there, it breaks down quickly. But I raced an arena cross in Albuquerque one year that it started as packed, and it broke down into basically a sand arena cross track. And I thought how enjoyable and fun that was and how different it was. So when you had talked about, you'd called me or hit me up about doing this, I was thinking of different ways that I think Daytona would still be rad and different. Not that anything's wrong with it now, but just can you imagine a sand supercross track that they built jumps and the whole rhythm track sections out and just let it deteriorate through the day and see how it went. So there's nothing wrong with what's going on today, but it's always fun to look back upon things and see what the direction is going.
For sure. And Daytona is, this track, like you mentioned earlier, it's kind of been a little flack online because the layout is practically copy paste from last year. And one things that made Daytona unique today versus, how it used to be super unique was that it's Ricky Carmichael designed and the layout is so unique. And I actually accidentally pulled up the 2021 layout and was confused because it looked so similar to this one, but not quite, because the camera angle was the difference. And I was like, wait,
Right.
and then I realized, oh, that's the wrong track map. But it's definitely kind of the same obstacles, just moved around a little bit.
Very similar. And the funny that you said that, because actually my buddy Chris Riesenberg Checkers is the first one that had posted that on our text thread. And I went back to look for similar images as well. And I think they've made a point to not have the same images and photograph them differently or obviously not a photograph, but to not show it so obviously similar. So I started spinning things around a little bit and sent them on the thread. I'm like, wow, damn, you're pretty correct, because I think they've gone out of their way to try and show it's not the same track. But how many outdoor tracks we go to a year, for the last 100 years that are basically the same layout. There's nothing wrong with duplicating to something again that we said earlier that works. And Ricky's challenges he's had to deal with. I think we had a pretty good race last year, and I think we're looking for something similar with the competition, how intense it is right now.
And I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people were super stoked when we got to have, they brought back was it Orlando? It was the 2007 Orlando track, and they brought back an exact replica because that's a very iconic race, and everybody was so amped on it. And, last year delivered. If it wasn't between, Anderson and Malcolm getting together a bunch of times, and then Eli actually catching Cooper, and then, the lapper, like, it was a memorable race. It was one of the most memorable races last year. Why not do this track again? I know that people kind of see it as like, oh, it's a cop out for Ricky, but no, it was great racing. It's a great track. Let's do it. Do you think the fans, I guess, are robbed from the experience for having the same track, or is it just stop with the gimmicks, let's do good racing?
I'm a big fan of Triple Crown. People call that a gimmick, but if it creates great racing, just as you said, last year was a phenomenal weekend or night of racing. The sand section it gets so deep, causes lots of problems, as we've seen. Even we see it in Supercross indoor in a stadium. So imagine it being bottomless, as it is at the Daytona field, because it is all sand. I don't think it's really a cop out at all. And we've seen such great racing already in 2023 that I don't think there's anything to suggest that having a similar track that we had last year, which was a great race, as we just said, I see a great night of racing coming up this Saturday night. The field is so deep in both classes. You can hear my voice being scratchy right now. I just got back from Dallas, went down there, got to sat in the stands. We're watching some iconic racing, some of the greatest racers we have seen in a long time. Equal racing, which is, I didn't think anyone's going to quite equal to Eli as Cooper has done. Anytime I sell Cooper Webb short, he stands up to the challenge, as he's done once again. Watching Chase come into his own as a professional racer, as one of the best in the world, has been a treat as well. I think we can all agree upon that. We see early signs of Eli with his mistakes. And in his frustration and his passion to want to do better.
So there are two things about this track map that I feel like are unique compared to what we normally see. The first is the section I'm going to talk about right up to the split lane that, the jumps are offset. They're higher on one end and then lower on the other end, and they zigzag back and forth. Why don't we see an obstacle like that? That feels like something that's very specific to Daytona, and it's not really an outdoor obstacle either. Do you think that's the kind of thing we should see more indoor, or is it better left for this?
Well, it's something I think that's been discussed even, during the broadcast. For one, it's easier to do on concrete because concrete does not break down. Dirt breaks down, especially sand, as we have in Daytona. The teams are now able to break sections down on digitally and can break it down to a tenth of a second, like which is the faster line. So it makes it a little more difficult in Supercross to do the split lane, because once everybody figures out what the faster lane is, everybody just takes that one line. It's nice to create a different patch or different options and stuff for the fans to see what they're going to take. But I think at Daytona, what makes it unique is that with it being a sandy base, I believe the section I'm looking at right now is the left and right hander right there, or the right and left hander we saw last year. That is the dark sandy part of the track. They didn't put any clay there. So we will see that track break down. So as one line might be faster throughout the earlier night and throughout the main, and they're gonna have to decide later which line is going to be better, and they might have to try something differently. So it's not always the best, but I think for Daytona, I think it works out pretty well in this right left hand chicane. And I don't really remember exactly how they were taking it last year, but I remember that there were some pretty good passes there. And I think Webb and even Eli had challenged each other, because I remember Webb had kind of come into that whoop section there, came into that lapper. They had to change up his line, and Eli decided, I'm going to try something different, and it worked for him. So when the track can break down, I think the interlining changes or alternate lanes works pretty well.
For sure. So Ricky always famously says the championship starts at Daytona, and this year that definitely kind of rings true because we only have 7 points separating the top three, which is a record for tightest after 7 rounds. Do you think that because this year it is true that it is the tightest, that we should buy more into that? Or do you think that kind of just diminishes how good of a season Eli is having to just say your lead doesn't matter.
Well, I think Eli would be probably the first. Even he knows how to win championships and he knows how to lose championships. So I think, and even Cooper does as well, as we saw when Webb and Roxon went toe to toe. It's such a mental thing for these guys and any of us. As Steve would famously call them, snowflakes, because it the slightest thing can throw these guys off. When I raced, it was a little differently. I don't think it was quite as mental as, at least it wasn't for me. It was just like, man, I was just having a good time racing my bike. But to see these guys break each other down, and even seeing them on the podium, when Chase won that heat race and smoked Eli, not specific what city it was in, but you could see the differences in their interviews. And then in the main event, they interview them, and you could see, like, again, the emotion, like, oh man, I thought I had him this weekend and I didn't. So Ricky's always said it, and I think a lot have said it, even back to the 80s when it was more drier, more daytime, more of a 30-minute grind instead of what it is today. But I think anything in sports, halfway point of the season, whether it's NFL, basketball, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, the halfway point of the season is when the tides turn, and you figure out who's for real, because the grind starts setting in, the wear and tear on your body, understanding your motorcycle, specifically in Supercross. I don't think there's anything that I think that anyone on that gate, and Eli would be the first to agree, goes, yes, the grind starts now.
All right, thanks, Denny, for chatting with me, and thank you for joining me on this episode of RacerX Track Exam. Be sure to visit racerxonline.com for all of your Supercross and Motocross news.